Good morning, everyone. Today's first day of February 2021. The time is 11:01 a.m. This is our weekly Commissioner's Status Report or Update. Attending Commissioners Duncan, Brooks, and Filios. Do we have any changes to the agenda? Hearing none. I'm going to reverse the order. We're going to go 3, 2, 1 so that because the last two items 2 and 3 should be pretty quick. Item 1 will likely take the longest. So why don't we just go through the pending items? I don't think I have any.
No.
We don't have any, do we? Or how come I didn't get?
It's,
Oh, there it is. It's attached. I'm
no,
sorry.
it's attached on your
There.
agenda. Chris, on your.
Oh,
It's
on
just
the
one
agenda.
sheet,
Yeah.
Okay.
and nothing's changed as far as I'm concerned with my stuff.
Okay, so yours is the first item, Citizen Advisory
Yep.
Committee. You're still on hold
Yep,
until?
till I get it done. I'm going as fast as I can.
Fair enough.
I'm pedaling as fast as I can here.
Okay, County Form of Government Study Committee.
Same thing.
Okay. But end of January, you were.
Well, I was hoping, but it's going to happen in the next few days.
Okay. Facilities expansion.
So next meetings are February 17th and 18th for the layout and design.
Of the building.
Yep.
Okay. Pack Airport lease.
Yeah, I'm still waiting to hear from Wally on the proposal, but I would expect it wouldn't take too much longer.
Okay. The audio upgrade, Nancy?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Financial, no, that is today. First, yeah, thank you. Go right ahead, Dena. Financial snapshot.
Thank you.
So it's already been a month. So I'll walk you through this very quickly. I know we have a lot of other items to do. I've enhanced this a little bit. So this is as of last Friday. On the top right, you can see by elected official what was budgeted, what's been spent, and what's remaining. Right now, all elected groups are under the 33.2% watermark.
Because we're one-third of the way
year,
through.
right? So everybody is on target right now. Nobody is showing that they're over, which is good. I did pull out the health insurance. Health insurance, we've spent to date about 30% of our budget at $3.4 million. So lots of medical, that's a big number. So we've collected about 37% of our revenue in total. And our current spending is overall at about 28%, which is pretty darn good.
Right.
So
Good.
then going down to the fund balances section, after we made the appropriation last week for $693,000, our assigned fund balance is at $11.2 million. Our unassigned fund balance, and I will be coming forward soon with our reshuffling of that, putting aside our reserve and recharging that assigned fund balance. Right now, our unassigned fund balance is at $20.3 million, and our committed fund balance is right around $1.7 million for this year's budget. As far as out-of-budget spending, we really haven't had much change. There was some snow groomer emergency repairs for about $13,000 there. Our payroll costs are now at about $63 million annually, and that bumps up our every 2-week payroll to about $2.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just keep up on these numbers. If you have any questions, happy to answer, or we can take it offline. You could shoot me an email, and I can dig into the numbers more deeply. But as
No,
of
this
right
looks
now,
good.
I think we're in pretty good shape.
This is a nice synopsis. Questions, anyone? Leslie, Bill?
Good snapshot.
Thank you, Dena. Okay, so item 2, time off for employees to receive COVID-19 vaccine. Potential action item, go Bill.
Somebody asked me about this, and I thought about it, and I think it's a good idea to at least bring up. I'm encouraging people to wear masks when they feel like it, and I'm encouraging people to get an inoculation as long as they don't have a medical or moral problem with it. And it's darn hard for those people to do it who work 9 to 5. And so they're having to shoehorn that in, and it's very difficult to get appointments. But to shoehorn that into a week someplace, lose X number of hours of pay to get it done, and it doesn't exactly make it something most people will want to or feel we're making it convenient for them to do. And I think that would be it's much better than losing people to COVID, either permanently or temporarily, or having them come into a department and then find out they have the disease later and shut the department down.
How much time do you figure? A couple hours?
2 hours. 2 hours. But I know it's not a budgeted item, but it's if we don't do it, it may cost us a lot more in time lost. And that's all I have to say.
Thoughts? Good.
Well, my thought is I didn't do this, so I hope nobody's.
Okay, hold on, guys. You have.
So we are going to be a spot for
was just-
vaccine, and so our employees will be able to do that. So whatever we do for the flu, I think would be appropriate to do for COVID. And I don't think we allow time off for the flu, but we do have a time where they come in on county time when it's here.
Is it going to be done here in this room?
We're one of the sites.
How
yeah.
soon?
I don't know that we have an answer to that. Last week, I spoke with the director of the Idaho Office of Emergency Management, Mr. Ritchie, and he and I spoke for about half an hour. And what he said to me, what he asked me, he said, if we can double, right now, just so everybody knows, where the 5 northern counties, District 1, are vaccinating about 3,400 per week. Mm-hmm. And his question of me was, if we can double that hypothetically, can you handle it? I said, well, if from a facility standpoint, yes, we can. I mean, we've offered this facility, and I'm sure there are others. From an administration standpoint, that is to say, people to administer the vaccine, I don't know.
Right.
But the point, I think, what Leslie's getting at is, right now, giving people the time off when the supply isn't there, I don't know if it buys us anything. But if this becomes, if the vaccine is available and we can administer it here, they can come right in and get it done.
Mm-hmm. Well, if it's here and they can come in and get it right done, they don't need any time off. But
They don't need any time off.
But if it's not available or able to be done here in any kind of a group, I mean, I don't know if anybody's been over to the fairgrounds. They have an area about 10 times as large as this room that they use for vaccinations. We don't have that kind of space.
No, but we would be supplementing. Nancy, did you want to, go ahead?
Commissioners, Nanci Jones for the record. Just to share with you the latest information on that, I spoke with Sylvia Proud, our HR director, last week. She indicated she had heard back from Panhandle. They did confirm we will be able to do the clinic here. They're not sure about the timing, primarily because of supply right now. But her comment to me was she probably expected it to be later in the spring, maybe as late as May. But again, that will be adjusted as more supply does come in. She will be working on paperwork to bring before the board, though, so that will be coming to a status update or a business meeting in the near future with additional information.
So then what are we doing in the interim? To Bill's question.
Well, to your point, Commissioner, until there's more supply, Panhandle right now is focusing on that Phase 1B, and then essential employees will follow that, is our understanding. Hopefully that helps.
I mean, yeah, I think the best thing is, go right ahead. Barry?
Thank you,
Prosecutor
Commissioners. Barry
Barry.
McHugh for the record. I would encourage the board to consider what's being proposed, just because there are categories of people who will qualify for the vaccine prior to a time when the county will be able to provide the majority of people
Right,
with these
right.
shots. And so you may have somebody that's over 65 and has a medical condition or fits into some category that's going to qualify earlier than the rest of us, let's say. There's also, you can get your name on a list with any one of the providers, and
That's
if
correct.
they have people cancel and they don't want the vaccines to go to waste, they can call you in and get the shot. So I think with, supervisor's authority or permission, obviously it's, pending necessity for people to be on the job. I think that flexibility, everyone who gets the shot, from my perspective, is one less person, generally speaking, you have to worry about, or at least a reduced risk, depending on the shot they get. Thank you.
Okay, so you're in support of Bill's proposal?
With the caveats, yes, that I mentioned.
Okay. Leslie? I mean,
I don't
2
really
hours.
have any.
I mean, 2 hours is fine. I mean, it's
Everybody's
really
not,
a big deal.
everybody's not gonna take 2 hours.
Well, sure.
I mean, that's just, you don't take the number of employees times 2 hours.
Right, and
Some people just don't want it, okay?
are we going to require that they prove that they went and got it? I mean,
You get a
that's,
card when you get it.
okay.
You get a card, yeah.
You walk around with your card.
I'm sorry, Nancy, you wanted to say something?
The only other thing, just because I don't know if you're
Bend that
aware.
down a little so you can talk into it.
I know, I'm
There.
short. The only other thing, I know KCSO has largely had the opportunity. Adult misdemeanor probation, solid waste, juvenile detention, and juvenile probation
They're already
have all
done.
already had that opportunity. So we've got a good portion of our workforce that has at least
Good,
had that offer.
good.
So even if it's half the workforce or 1/3 the workforce, with whatever's remaining, certainly everybody's not going to take the 2 hours at once, because it still has to be staged per the Panhandle
Scheduled,
Health
yeah.
recommendation. I'm fine with it.
And it's also about 28% of the people who are eligible for it just plain don't want it. And that's okay too. That's their choice and their right.
I'm sorry, who's on the line?
Sean is here.
Okay, good morning, Sean. All right, so I guess, do we need a motion?
I guess I just want to go talk to Sylvia before we do this, because if all these people have already gotten it, have they taken their own time? So now is it going to be not treating people equally? Are we going to have to, back bill the time that they took? So I guess I would just ask for that question, and then we can put it on business meeting next week to ratify.
I think we can just make this just as complicated as we want and kill it by delay. I think it needs to be done now before more people get sick.
Dena, did you want to say something? I saw you nodding.
He's going.
Anyone else have any thoughts? So what did you want to check with Sylvia?
Just the fact that have the people who've already gotten vaccinated taken their own time off, or, was it administrative? Did they do it on their own time? I just want to make sure that people are treated fairly, because if we say, okay, now people have 2 hours off, and then, okay, but wait a minute, I got mine done last month and I didn't get to have 2 hours off. So where's my 2 hours?
Some people may do that, and some very petty people may worry about that. I'm not worried about that.
I'm not worried about it either, but as it turns out, we have to be consistent. So by putting it off for a week, I think we're okay.
Put it off for a week, we're gonna have all the answers.
Well, there are not that many answers. The question is this, the people that have already taken it, we want to make sure, so your concern is that we don't run afoul of the people that have already taken it and done it on their own time?
Right, right. And if they haven't done it on their own time, if they've already done it on county time, then there's not going to be an issue.
But even if they did it on county time, why does that present an issue?
Well, if they've done it on county time, then why would we offer people 2 hours off to get this done when, if it's handled administratively already? I just would like to talk to Sylvia and get her thoughts on it.
What?
Yeah, but. Okay, but if people, if there are those who've already taken it, employees that is, on their own time, I shouldn't say that. those that have taken it during work hours, okay, presumably they've already been paid.
If they took time off to
Right.
go do it.
Right.
We make provision for the people who want to make an application for payment for that time that they took off without pay, provided they show us their little inoculation card. Very simple. Pardon?
We would have to see what the scope of that was, to see what extra work that entailed
For who?
for payroll, for HR, for employees.
Sometimes you got to do things even though they cost a little more. There she is.
Oh, hey, so
Just
can
who we
you
were
speak
talking
to
about.
that?
Good timing. Okay, so 2 on the agenda, we're working backwards. We finished item 3. And the discussion we're having is Bill made a proposal to allow 2 hours time off paid for employees who need or wish to take or can take the vaccination on company county time. The conversation as it ensued, Leslie brings up a point that's saying, well, okay, wait a minute, what about those that have already done it, that might have done it or not done it on company time? How do we ensure the consistency going forward?
Sure. At this point, I do not have any information whether those individuals who have received it, KCSO, juvenile detention, AMP, if they did it on company time or not. I can reach out to those departments and see how they handled it. And also, I'll reach out to Tiffany Westbrook to see if she has total numbers or if the departments do, because as I'm figuring out the documentation that Panhandle Health wants from us, if I don't need to estimate it so high, then I'd rather give more of an accurate figure than just a generality, because in that will also include family members, and there's a formula for that. So as Nanci had mentioned, because I started to watch the meeting, it probably springish, May, hopefully sooner if supply increases and availability becomes available. But we do have to fill out some paperwork to be considered a closed site for our employees.
Yeah, that's different.
Yes.
Okay.
But I can bring back information to you next week if you'd like.
Okay. Let's wait a week. We'll get it done. All right. We just need to be consistent. Do you have any idea how many employees who choose to are being vaccinated on a daily or weekly basis at this point?
No, I don't.
But
Yeah.
we know that several organizations have already.
Yes, and hopefully I can get some general numbers either from the department heads, elected officials, or Tiffany, and maybe even Panhandle if they had a generality of this is your emergency responders and so forth. I'll try and get that from Alana at Panhandle Health.
Okay. So let's see if we can have something that we can take up at next Monday's status meeting.
Okay.
In the course of 1 week, I don't know how many people are going to make appointments, but they have to go by the priority that's already been set by Panhandle Health. So, okay, fair enough.
Chris, I do know there's been discussion among HR directors in the state of Idaho having discussions of how we're incentivizing employees to potentially get the vaccine. And they're
Yes.
doing some wellness activities. They're also have talked about giving time off.
That's what Bill's
so that
suggesting.
they'd be can come and get it done. But they are trying to find incentives to encourage people to do it.
Well, right now, there's a supply shortage. And I said, you might have heard me earlier when I said we're doing 3,400 among the 5 northern counties. We're doing 1,800 a week in Kootenai. So if you do the quick math, that's just under, about 150 a day. But remember, that's for the full population, or the 70% or so that are going to choose to take the vaccine. So how many employees are actually in that fold? We can do it next week. We'll have a better idea.
I'll have
okay.
some numbers for you.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, let's move on to the new building financing option. Okay, general discussion. Just to start it off, I'm going to ask Treasurer Matheson. Steve, would you come forward? Would you mind? One more time for the benefit of everyone, not just here, but folks listening in, just literally go through on a cursory level the options. and then we can potentially get into more detail.
I didn't prepare anything, so I'm going to wing it.
okay.
That's
All
okay.
right. I think you had 3 or 4, but go ahead.
Yeah. Let me see. Let me formulate a thought here. It depends on how much money you want to spend. I had a conversation briefly just a few moments ago with our solid waste colleagues.
Yes.
When you and I first started talking about this several months ago, a couple months ago, I'm not sure what it was, the ballpark figure being bantered about was around $12 to $15 million. At that kind of a spend, I thought that we had the capability of funding that internally by just simply borrowing it from our enterprise fund, as well as scraping together some other funds that are likely available in our normal operations and budget process. Over the last couple of weeks, the conversation has switched to, well, I don't know if it's going to be 12 or 15 million. It could be as high as 32 million. It's somewhere around 20 million, maybe 24. If we're substantially above that original conversation of 12 million, 15 million, now we're getting into another category of what I believe are alternative ways of financing this. And Dena can, I'm sure, walk you through the spreadsheet that she had sent out several months ago about the different alternatives. But if we're in that, let's just call it 18 million and above, I think we're talking about having to go out and either issue a public bond, which I think the consensus of you three is that might be the appropriate thing to do, but is it going to pass? I don't think it would, but it might. Okay, so that's the first option. The second,
Also known as the revenue bond, right?
actually, no, it's not a revenue bond. This is a general
General
obligation.
General
bond.
obligation.
So it's-
There's a couple of them here that require the public approval.
Right. A general obligation bond is going to be the promise from the county to pay the funds back. It's not restricted in any way, shape, or form on a stream of revenues, for example. For example, if solid waste issued a bond under the purview of Kootenai County, that would be a revenue bond because the revenues going to solid waste would be siphoned off to pay specifically that obligation. The county, in generally speaking,
Understood.
for a building for general uses, would issue a general obligation bond. So
Got it.
that's a public vote.
Thank you.
And you guys have to figure out whether you have the appetite to do that or not. Now, an alternative, if we're in that 18 million up range, is what we have talked about in the past is, generically speaking, it's called a annual appropriation lease.
Okay.
So effectively, you're not indebting the county greater than 1 year, so it is not technically considered public debt, which means that you do not have to issue any kind of voter-approved initiative.
This is the lease debt hybrid?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, with a structure such as this, and I'm going to be candid, and I'm going to speak as clearly as I can, it is a way to avoid having the voters weigh in on issuing this, what I consider long-term debt. Technically speaking, it's only 1 year in duration, so it's not encumbering the county greater than 1 year, which then automatically dictates that you have to get voter approval. So this is a way to get the money you want, pay it back over a long period of time, but not actually get voter approval. That is called an annual appropriation lease contract, and there's lots of varieties of that.
Like a certificate of participation.
That's one option.
Okay.
And then our friend, I've forgotten his name. He
John
approached-
Austin?
Yeah,
John
John
Austin.
Austin. He's coming with you a different alternative of essentially the same thing. Now, in all those structures, and there's a variety of them, I think John Austin was talking about, it's called a bank-held tax, it's a bank-held tax-exempt bond issue. But the difficulty with all those structures when we're doing these annual lease appropriations is, first and foremost, each and every subsequent board during the budget process, if they don't appropriate the funds to service that debt, game over. The structure itself and the land underneath goes to the investors. So there's an annual appropriation that must take place by each board subsequent to you guys.
Got it.
Now, in reality, what it does is it's handcuffed them into that decision. So 99 times out of 100, they're going to approve it because the structure of these bonds, again, the lease appropriation bonds, is that we have to give to the actual investors the land that the building sits on and probably the surrounding parking structure as well, because their collateral is that investment of the new building and the land underneath and the infrastructure around it. So that structure itself, and hopefully I'm not going into too much
No,
detail.
no, no.
No,
keep
no.
going. You're fine.
Is complicated, it's expensive, so to speak, and it would require a lot of effort on behalf of you guys, myself, Dena, and our legal staff to structure that, because we have to make certain that the investors can assume ownership of that land and building anytime the appropriation.
Should the county default?
Well, should the county choose not to
Yep,
appropriate the
pay,
funds? They're
okay.
not
But-
defaulting.
Either
Wouldn't-
way.
Now, one of the big concerns is we don't want to put it in front of the voters. I honestly have no problem with that if we do the proper education. But don't we, every 2 years, in effect, put it in front of the voters because they can vote out the commissioners who have voted for something?
I don't disagree with that
Yeah,
I
comment.
mean, that's really what happens. That's going to become an issue in any campaign, I
Right,
believe, I
that's true.
hope.
Okay.
I think that's a good starting point.
So on the general obligation bond, if we were to get that passed, what does that require of county infrastructure to make that happen? Because you just said on the lease, the certificate of participation model, that would take a lot of internal working.
It would be essentially the same amount.
Okay.
Slightly more on the lease appropriation because it's a little bit unique in its structure, and the legal documentation is much more critical. The public debt issuance or the general obligation, it's been done thousands, if not millions of times. It's known, it's understood. So the differential in cost and effort is, even though it can be measurable, it's insignificant when compared to the total dollar amounts that I believe the three of you are considering to finance the building.
What kind of terms, I don't want to go into great detail, but are we looking at 10 years, 20-year terms?
Whatever you want.
We can go, okay.
Now, economically speaking, if you're going to go through the effort of issuing a bond, the
Yes.
education and everything else, or the lease appropriation structure, you're probably talking at least a 7, maybe a 10-year amortization period.
Okay.
You can conceivably go out to 20 years in either structure. General obligation bonds are commonly go out to 30 years.
Up to 30, okay. Okay. And the same thing with the annual appropriation lease, flexible?
You're going to have a little bit more challenge going out 30 years, but
Oh,
it's
yeah,
doable.
for sure.
Likely 20 years would be where you would start the conversation, and you might narrow it down to maybe 15. All
Okay.
of those are long-term, decades in kind of consideration.
Now, you also mentioned the potential for the use of foregone.
Correct.
Okay. Did you, go ahead.
Well, when you issue these debt, whether it's general obligation debt, whether it's the lease appropriation, you have to consider that a small distinction. If you go to the voters and you get approval, the voters have approved the county to go into debt, which means that they can levy to service that debt. So that's how you're going to fund that general obligation. With the annual lease appropriation, you're not encumbering through the authority of the voters to incur that debt. So you now have to come up with a cash flow stream to pay back the funds that you've borrowed from this structure.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ways that you can do that is you can, just out of your normal budget process, year to year, come up with the funds necessary. You could possibly use the expiring URDs that we've spoken about in the past. That seems to be somewhat in play or in question, whether we're going to continue to be able to do that after this legislative session.
Yep.
So if that falls through and you go through the path of doing this lease appropriation or the annual appropriation, and you're relying on the expiries of the URDs or the annual increase that you can increase the budget to service that debt, and that goes away through the legislature this year, now you have a dilemma. Now, in my mind, the way that I think of foregone is that's kind of your resort of last option.
Yep.
You could then use foregone to come up with that cash flow stream to service that annual lease appropriation debt. With that said, the legislature is also thinking about restricting your ability to do that after this session. So by going through the annual appropriation lease and relying on either expiry of URDs, budgetary growth, and/or foregone, those all three options might be taken away from you at this legislative session. Now, my gut is it will be restricted, maybe to the point that you will not be able to afford a $30 million lease appropriation structure, but that's speculation at that point.
But we don't know until the legislature finishes their work.
Not unless you can tell me what they're going to do. I don't know.
Oh, no.
But the issue too is, okay, so let's say they don't do something this year or they do something mild this year. It doesn't mean they're not going to come back next year and do more. So to me, this is sounding more like general obligation bond is the way to go, because then we have the taxing authority that cannot be taken away from the legislature.
I would agree with everything. The only thing that I would change slightly is that if you incurred the indebtedness this year through an annual appropriation lease, I find it highly unlikely that in a subsequent legislative session that they would claw back that previous authority for you to use that ongoing taxing authority to service that quote-unquote long-term debt.
But if we used the closing URDs to do that, then,
That would always, yes, be at risk, yes.
okay.
No question.
That would always be at risk. Or we can go strictly foregone.
Well, this is something that, and again, I'm going to be just blunt and candid. I've spoken to each one of you individually about the option of if you guys collectively decide that you want to spend $30 million, you're going to have to secure some kind of future cash flow stream to service that obligation. Now, defensively, what you could do is you could open this year's budget. And this is theoretical. Okay,
No, go ahead.
I
It's
haven't
an
done
option.
any legal research. I'm going to need Barry's team to help me on this. So I'm putting the cart before the horse, so don't quote me on this. You could open up this year's budget, claim foregone, lock in that cash flow stream, issue the actual lease appropriation obligation, and you've secured the actual cash flow streams that I think are necessary to service that debt that you've issued theoretically this year. And then if the legislature chooses not to restrict you as much as I think some people are worried they're going to, then you go back, open the budget up again, reverse the decision to use foregone, and everybody goes forward happy. That's a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, that's
It's
good, though.
complicated. It's, I don't even know if it's doable. There's some questions regarding if you do open the budget, you claim the foregone, will the tax commission actually certify this next year because of the lack of certification in the opening of the budget versus last year's certification of the tax levy rate? It gets very cumbersome at that time. So one of the things we'd have to do is check with the tax commission to see if we would not be putting ourselves in a situation that we couldn't recover from next year when we ask for a certification of a levy rate that's well beyond the
Right.
3% maximum that was certified the year before. Does that make
And
sense?
using that foregone, what would that mean to the person who owns a $400,000 home.
It'd be much too much money. I don't want, I mean, I'm speaking as a taxpayer here for this response. I don't want you guys using foregone, but if you guys choose that the building is important enough and you want to go ahead and ensure that we have the ability to pay for that decision to pay for the building, foregone might be a consideration that you'll have to swallow if you want to go that route. I am not arguing for or against any of these options.
And what if we kept it $18 million or under?
Now you're kind of at that borderline of, I would like to see it closer to 15 or less.
Okay.
We could probably find the internal types of funding that could pay for that. We're going to be taking on some other risks. We're going to probably have to spend down some fund balances. We're not going to have the liquidity that we need, and on and on and on. But it'll be an option that you guys will have to weigh.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so, all right. So the threshold appears to be 15 million, thereabouts.
And I'm going to be extremely candid with you once again. I have not done a significant amount of work to calculate these things because I'm waiting for a definitive decision by the board is, yes, we're building a building. It's going to cost this much money, and we're going to do it then, or here, or next year, or the following year.
Right.
And I think that's going to come in April.
Now,
And
once
the-
you guys
and-
make that decision, then I can go ahead and, put a little bit more focus on it. I've not been willing to do that yet, just because I don't want to waste my time.
No, I get it. And I'm going to ask Nanci Plouffe to come up shortly and discuss if we go with a pure foregone approach, which you want to call that a fourth option or whatever. But Dena, when you and I talked, you gave me a figure, and I know this is loose, I'm not trying to pin you down, but if we took a certain amount of foregone, purely foregone, if you will, what that would mean to, let's say, a homeowner with a $300,000 home. Can you? Sure. You want to come up with that? Thank you.
Let me ask one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, if public approval is not a good idea, and I think it is, but I know some people differ with me on that. Number one, the general obligation bond is a bad idea. Number two, the revenue bond is a bad idea.
Why is that? Just so I understand how you're thinking.
I mean, if you need public approval, if that's bad. Then you get into too risky on the tax increment financing, not appropriate under leasing. And the last one is variable rate demand obligations, which don't sound good to me.
That's actually a version of, well, okay.
It just kind of brings things down to
Yeah.
one possibility.
That's a great conversation that you guys can have.
Yeah. Are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
okay.
I'm done. I don't like it. but
Dena, go ahead.
Okay, so to answer your question on how it affects a taxpayer. So I do have a foregone calculator. Now, if the world is held still and you were to take foregone, if the person's value of their home year over year stays the same, it'd be about $100 a year to take
$100.
all the foregone.
When you say all,
For 100,000 in value?
No, a $400,000 house,
which right now
all
is
the
average.
foregone,
Yeah.
100% of the foregone.
If it stayed the same, it would be about $100 a year.
Right,
Okay.
but that's a very
it's not.
loose number,
It's not
and
gonna
we
stay the
can,
same.
we can bring the calculator in and we can have it on
Yeah.
the screen and we can play
And when you
around
say
with that.
$100 a year, how much foregone are you assuming?
All of it.
Which is what, about 12 million?
No, it's
10-6.
10,
It's 10,
Yeah,
10 and
10.
some change.
10 and some
10.6.
change, okay.
So,
Per your previous, right here.
so
you got
my
it.
2 cents. Our payroll is $2.5 million every 2 weeks. So from a person with a corporate background, and I'm kind of an outsider here. I was out in the world doing corporate finance for a long time. So to me, $10 million is not a ton of money. It's a ton of money to the taxpayer, but in the big scheme of things, when you're running a county, and we're a big county now, with the risk of the state taking our ability to pay for things, I think that Steve bringing it up it's a good thing to consider as part of your toolkit. The way I come at things, I'm looking at the budget and I'm looking holistically at the whole budget, so that's kind of my perspective. So this is one project, but we know that once we build a building, whatever that building is, we're gonna start moving people around, which means we're gonna have to retrofit other buildings. We're gonna have KEC, it's probably gonna need some remodeling and stuff. So besides all the other things we have to pay for, we're gonna have all these other buildings that we're gonna have to be doing too. So from where I'm sitting, and this is just, my opinion, if you take that foregone, and other counties have done it for big projects, you ensure that you have a backstop against the state limiting your ability to tax just to keep the wheels on the bus. You have this pool of money that you can build your building and build it to what you need it to be, not just a shell, but actually an inhabitable building, so you can do your big move around and make sure that the county has facilities for the next 20, 30 years. And you also have funds available to do all the other things that you're gonna need to be doing because we continue to grow. The services are continued. Bela said, a couple days ago, he's gonna need to add 6 people just to keep up with the demand. We have a huge growth trend. So having those resources, to me, as a person looking at finance and looking at long-term, to me, $100 per taxpayer is a small price to pay to ensure a strong fiscal future. And the other aspect of it from a conservative standpoint is when you buy a car cash, you pay a lot less for it than if you finance it. So just from a simple point of view, and I know that's an oversimplification, you also don't risk losing land, losing a building, that sort of thing. So it's a big decision. It's not going to be easy, but my 2 cents.
Okay, let me ask, do you have a question for Dena?
I do. If we're talking general obligation bond, is it possible to do a back of the napkin, not today, but if we do one for an $18 million building, how much that would cost compared to the foregone?
I don't know. I could try to pull that together, but again, if you build an $18 million building, you can't inhabit it. It's not going to have furniture. It's not going to have walls. It's not going to have cubes.
FF&E, yeah.
Right, but we're in the CMGC process, and so it may not end up being that. We might be able to get way more than we're assuming today.
Right. And if you go for a general obligation bond, it's going to have to go before the voters.
Yep.
So that's probably going to delay your time horizon. But debt service, you're still going to have, like Steve said, you're going to have debt service. And if you're limited by the legislature to how much you can tax, you're going to have to find a source to
Right,
pay
but
that
if
debt
it's a general
service.
obligation bond, then we can levy to get that. So I'm trying to get the difference between how much the levy would cost the taxpayers versus how much foregone would cost the taxpayers. I kind of need to see apples to apples.
And I think, for me, what it's going to come down to, and that's a good point, is what's going to cost the least in terms of financing, and number 2, what's doable. When I think of going out to the public, that's going to take one hell of a selling job, and I don't know that I would be wanting to undertake that. And plus, my personal philosophy is you hire me to make these decisions. You don't like them, unelect me. But if it's something that by statute demands clearly that we have to go out, and this does if we go that route, I get it. But if there's a better route that isn't going to cost more, because that's key, if it's going to cost more, now maybe the answer is, yeah, we go out to the public. But if it's not going to cost more to go out to the public, which, by the way, the process itself is going to cost some money, I guess I'm not in favor of that. But let's, Nanci, why don't you come, thank you so much, Dena. Yeah, Steve, thanks a lot.
Let me
Go
just,
ahead.
I'm going to add one wrinkle, and this is the way I think about this, is when I'm building an asset, I look at the useful life of the asset. This useful life of the asset is going to be 20, 25 years. I think the people that should pay for it are the ones that use it over the next 20 and 25 years. So in most situations, long-term assets financing is the appropriate structure because, yes, it might be slightly more money, but what you're doing is you're allocating the cost of that expenditure of the asset over the people that are going to use it. If you spend it out of existing or fund balances or anything else like that, people in the past are paying for something that they may not even use because they've moved out of the community or died or whatever. So don't have an aversion of debt. I don't think that's necessarily should be averted, especially given the interest rate environment right now. Money isn't free, but it's pretty close to it. So, my last 2
No, good
cents.
point. And those are good points. I'm not averse to it at all. My concern is getting it passed. If in fact we're determined and we realize or acknowledge that we need the building. And it may very well work.
I've spoken to 3 community groups in the last month, and every time I explain nuts and bolts of the story, they're I see audience, members and raising their hand, okay, I'd vote for a bond. I'd vote for a bond. So it's encouraging. I mean, it's only 3 groups, but if we get the right groups on board to support it, then I think we could pass it. And I definitely want public input, no matter what road we take, in the minimum in the form of those lovely votes that we do, that we've done
Advisory?
twice. Thank you.
Advisory?
Yeah, so that would be my minimum, is to ask for an advisory vote. Here are 2 options. Which option do you like better? Or if we can get the right support, then go out for the general obligation bond. That's why I'm just curious what it would cost in debt service.
That's a good
Because,
point.
I agree with Steve, money, it still costs, but it's so low right now that to have that flexibility and ability to not kill our savings account, then I think that's probably a better way to go
Okay.
at this point.
Makes sense. An advisory vote. Yeah, Nancy, please.
We had a question online. If you could briefly just give a definition of what foregone is.
Okay, so try again. Foregone balance is it's a virtual balance. It's not actual money, but it's a theoretical amount of money that is that we could have taxed for in the past that we didn't. And that sum, that theoretical sum, accumulates over time. So every time we don't take advantage of our full 3% taxing authority, say we only take 1% in a given year, the difference, that other 2%, goes into that artificial account. Or if we,
How many years back does that go?
oh, it's indefinite.
Indefinite.
It's indefinite.
Okay, so that's what we have built up at this
Right.
point. Now, have we to this point used foregone for anything in the county?
Not in my tenure, but I believe it's been used in the past.
I don't have
Yeah,
that.
I don't know when.
I don't know when.
I would say not over the past 3 or 4 boards.
Okay. And this is kind of a silly thing, but I am not worried about selling this to people, to explaining it to them. I mean, look, we all 3 explained to people why they should elect us. So if you're committed to it enough, you can go out and explain it to people why they need to do what they need to do. They're not stupid.
And the advisory vote, I think, is a good idea. I don't think we want to be overly reliant on it, but at least with an advisory vote, you're giving them the options. You're saying, okay, here are a couple different options. Anyway, Nancy, go ahead and explain the use of foregone. Leslie and Bill have copies of this, but you want this so that you can refer to your notes?
This is based on a conversation Leslie and I had a few days ago. And Steve and Dena can correct me if I'm thinking about this too simplistically. But once we take the $10.6 million in foregone, it is in our budget every year, but it doesn't have to be. So if we take it this year or next year, if we open the budget this year, or if we wait and take it next year, that's $10.6 million that can be added into a capital fund. The next year it will automatically be in our budget again, based on our base budget is now increased by $10.6 million. So we take that $10 million and also put it in a capital account to build the building. In 2 years, we could fund $21.2 million. The 3rd year, we take it out of the budget. So now we paid for the building in 2 years instead of having debt service to pay over 7, 10, 20 years. And anybody who's purchased a house, if you've looked at your amortization schedule, you pay significantly more for that house at the end of the life of your loan than you did when you bought it. So this would eliminate all of those debt service fees. And it would also eliminate the ability for future boards to take foregone. So we would use it for 2 years, but then no one could take it again until we built up more foregone. So it's not that it could stay in the budget forever, it doesn't have to. And Dena's calculations, if it costs the average homeowner $100, $200 a year for those 2 years, our building is paid for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, whereas every other option is a longer term, it seems.
Right. And so they would be paying for years on a building that we could fund in 2 and take away the ability to have foregone put into the budget in perpetuity forever in the future. Does that make sense?
You just have to make sure that there's a
It comes
board in
out.
place that will take it out.
Right. And it could be during the 3rd year, because of all the extra expenses that Dena was talking about, retrofitting this building, providing furnishings for the new building, or doing the KEC remodel, that we put back 8 million instead of 10, but it's still significantly less, and we've still funded the building in 2 years. But I know that foregone has bad connotations with the public,
That's
so
That's true.
it's just an
Good
option.
explanation.
Okay, super. Okay.
Yep.
Steve, did you want to?
Uh-oh. He was back there with his calculator.
No, I wasn't. As a treasurer, I would reject that idea. I do not think it's appropriate to go ahead and have a spike in individual property taxes to that extent, nor do I think it's appropriate to exhaust fund balances. As a treasurer, I think you need, not fund balances, I'm sorry, foregone. I think foregone balances just prove the prudence that the commissioners have had over the years to accumulate those balances for a truly rainy day. To forego the foregone, I think, is inappropriate, ill-advised. So I would not support that.
The prudence that you refer to, you had said that prior boards had over-forecasted expenses and under-forecasted revenues. I think you're being a little bit too complimentary. I think some of that balance was created on the backs of employees. Raises that were withheld, increases that should have gone. Yes, it is wise to have a foregone balance, but it has to be something that's planned for. I think you're giving too much credit, quite frankly, from what I've seen in the past.
I may be, and we've had this conversation, and
Yes,
I
we
do-
have.
I do agree with your comment. One of the things that, and I don't want to get into kind of a philosophical
No, that's okay.
conversation, but the legislature, and they're approaching this issue about local government spending too much money and wanting to restrict their budget capacity from year to year, I think is short-sighted and it's ill-advised.
I agree with you.
The original people that came up with these parameters, I think, were actually pretty bright. And there are going to be periods of time, like you suggested, where funding was, or I should say, underestimating expenditures, or I should say revenues, and estimating expenditures
Expenses.
creates this disconnect, which eventually will be corrected with future boards. That 3% limit, to me, seems about right. And over time, it'll even out. And that accumulation of fund balances, not fund, of foregone, is just that elastic component in there that can get us from commissioner to commissioner to commissioner, from board to board to board, from decade to decade to decade. So your suggestion that maybe the commissioners in the past have overestimated, expenses and underestimated revenues by either design or just ignorance is probably true. but it will equal out, and that equaling out is the foregone balance that has been accumulated.
Okay.
So, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, enough. So where does that leave us? Are we, just to make it simple, are we going, before we make the go, no-go decision,
Which is April.
okay, that's what I was just going to ask. We almost necessarily have to wait until then?
Yeah, we have to wait to know what the legislature's done.
But going forward, I'm still speaking to groups. In 2 weeks, I have another group to speak to. So, and then town halls, if, we start those up. I'm still trying to get the word out as much as possible about our dilemma and how do people think about it and feel about it. And then coming up with advisory vote language too. I almost would want to, May, I think, unfortunately, is just going to be such a low voter turnout that I'm not sure we're going to get a
That might actually be
great.
good.
Well, will it be good
But in
enough
other
to
words,
determine what the sentiment is?
Well, the issue won't get clouded by other issues.
Right.
So it'll have a good chance of standing on its own, and people would have little or no excuse not to educate themselves.
And if that encouraged people to vote in
There you
May,
go.
that would even be better. So,
What do you think?
I think we could put the jail, never mind,
Jail.
the prison release center on the ballot again, since the governor hasn't obviously taken the hint.
Okay.
Yes, we have to wait until we find out.
So the legislature typically is scheduled to adjourn, yes, at the end of March. Typically, it runs over a little bit, so it might be mid-April. And that's, I guess, when we make the go, no-go decision. Quick question. Architect, when do we pay?
so we've already paid $33,000, and we're only obligated to $693,000. That's phase one. So if we say we cannot build a building for whatever reason, that's all the county's obligated to. So that's where it just stops right there.
All right. Good discussion.
Good,
Public
very good.
comment.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Name and address. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you can just say the city. Yeah, you don't
Oh,
have to state
okay.
it's not a hearing, public hearing.
Oh, that's
Gotcha.
true. Go ahead.
Erin Barnard, Coeur d'Alene, for the record. I actually came for the facilities expansion discussion. I thought that was really great discussion. And just what I've heard from that today, the foregone from my perspective, seems like a great avenue to look into further, although I am definitely not a treasurer. So I will agree with whatever you guys think of. But actually, my public comment is about the employee time off for the COVID vaccine.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that there needs to be some consistency between this vaccine and any other vaccines that are administered by the county, because without it being a procedure in place already, we're setting a really terrible precedence moving forward for anything that happens again in the future, especially with the Panhandle Health Board presentation last Thursday about the numbers dropping dramatically for positivity rates and death rates and all of that stuff I don't need to get into. So I was just commenting on the precedence that this can set if we don't follow the procedures that are in place, or maybe will be in place later on, but they're not in place right now. So that was my comment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your coming. Anyone else? Employees can comment too, right? Hearing none, 12 noon, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Aaron, special thanks. Thanks for coming.
Sean, I'll call you this afternoon.